Subscribe to Infidelity Tales Lab for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. The precinct's fluorescent lights flickered as 6-year-old Gregory Huang pushed through the heavy glass doors at 3:17 a.m. His Spider-Man pajamas were soaked with blood. Dark crimson stains covered his chest, his small hands, even streaked across his pale cheek. The night desk sergeant, a 20-year veteran named Patricia O'Connor, looked up from her computer screen and felt her heart stop. "Jesus Christ," she whispered, vaulting over the counter with surprising speed. She knelt before the boy, her hands hovering uncertainly. "Sweetheart, are you hurt? Where's the blood coming from?" Gregory's brown eyes were unnaturally calm, too calm for a child his age. He clutched a folded piece of paper in his left hand. "I'm not hurt. Daddy said to give you this and answer your questions." Within 90 seconds, the station erupted. Officers materialized from break rooms and back offices. Someone called for an ambulance. Someone else reached for Gregory, but he stepped back, shaking his head. "I need to talk to whoever's in charge." Daddy said it's important. Detective Rhonda McKenzie, pulling a double shift, arrived in the lobby within 3 minutes. She'd seen her share of horrors in 15 years on the force, but a blood-soaked child calmly requesting the person in charge made her skin crawl. She crouched to his level, her voice gentle but professional. "I'm Detective McKenzie, Gregory. Can you tell me what happened? Where's your mother?" The boy handed her the folded paper, then delivered the words that would make every cop in that room freeze. "Mommy's in our basement with Mr. Morrow. Daddy said to tell you they're both alive, but they won't be going anywhere. He said you should hurry because he only gave them enough sedative for 6 hours, and it's been 4.5. 48 hours earlier, Marshal Huang sat in his home office, surrounded by court boards covered in photographs, news clippings, and handwritten notes connected by red string. To an outsider, it looked like the workspace of a madman. To Marshal, it was simply research, the same meticulous process that had made him one of the most successful crime novelists of the past decade. His latest book, The Patience of Monsters, had spent 18 weeks on the bestseller list. Critics praised his uncanny understanding of criminal psychology and procedural accuracy that put seasoned detectives to shame. What they didn't know was that Marshall's obsessive research methods bordered on the extreme. He'd spent months embedding himself in police stations, attending trials, interviewing convicts, even riding along with homicide detectives. But the board in front of him wasn't for a novel. The photographs pinned, there were surveillance shots he'd taken himself over the past 6 weeks. His wife, Nicole, beautiful, 34-year-old Nicole, with her auburn hair and easy smile, entering a downtown apartment building. Nicole meeting a man at a restaurant. Nicole and that same man, Kirk Morrow, checking into the Riverside Hotel. Marshall had discovered the affair 2 months ago. A chance encounter. He'd seen her car outside a place she claimed never to have been. At first, he'd felt the expected emotions: betrayal, rage, grief. They'd been married for 8 years. Gregory was 6. They'd built a life together, or so he'd thought. But Marshall's writer's brain, trained to dig deeper, to ask questions, had pushed past the initial pain. Why had Nicole strayed? The answer, when he found it, transformed his heartbreak into something colder and far more dangerous. Nicole wasn't just having an affair. She was involved in something criminal. Kirk Morrow, Marshall discovered through his network of law enforcement contacts, was a person of interest in multiple investigations. Illegal gambling operations, money laundering, suspected connections to a drug distribution network operating out of 3 states. Nothing ever stuck. Kirk was smart, careful, and surrounded himself with people willing to take falls for him. And Nicole had become one of those people. Marshall's phone buzzed. A text from his research assistant, Jerry Kaplan, a former investigative journalist who helped him fact-check his novels. "Got the financial records you wanted. You're not going to like this." Marshall called him immediately. "How bad?" "Your wife's been moving money through shell accounts for the past 4 months. Small amounts, nothing that would trigger bank alerts individually, but it adds up to about $180,000. It's textbook structuring. Someone taught her how to avoid federal reporting requirements." Marshall closed his eyes. "Kirk Morrow, that'd be my guess. There's more. I pulled property records. Morrow owns a warehouse in the industrial district through one of his LLCs. The place was raided 3 years ago on suspicion of being a chop shop, but they didn't find anything. My source at the DA's office says they think he was tipped off by someone in the department or someone close to someone in the department. Marshall, whatever you're planning to do with this information, I'm protecting my son, Jerry. That's all. After he hung up, Marshall opened his bottom desk drawer and withdrew a leather journal. Inside, he documented everything: dates, times, photographs, financial records, recorded conversations. Not for a novel this time. This was evidence. But evidence alone wouldn't be enough. Kirk Morrow had dodged prosecution for years. He had connections, money, and most importantly, he had Nicole, which meant he had leverage over Marshall. No, Marshall needed something more permanent. Something that would remove Kirk from their lives forever and protect Gregory from the fallout. He needed to do something he'd only ever written about before. Nicole arrived home just after midnight, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. Marshall was waiting in the living room, a glass of scotch in his hand, his first drink in 3 years. The sight of it should have alerted her that something was wrong. Long day at the gallery? He asked, his voice neutral. Nicole worked at an art gallery downtown, or at least that's where she claimed to spend her days. Inventory took forever. She kicked off her shoes, not meeting his eyes. Gregory already asleep? 2 hours ago. We need to talk, Nicole. Her body tensed. It's late, Marshall. Can't wait. No. He set down his glass and pulled out his phone, swiping to a photograph. The Riverside Hotel, room 412. Last Tuesday, 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. The color drained from her face. She opened her mouth, then closed it. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. How long have you known? Long enough. Sit down. She collapsed into the armchair across from him, her perfect composure crumbling. Marshall, I don't care about the affair. His interruption was sharp, surgical. Well, I care, but that's not why we're having this conversation. I care about Kirk Morrow. I care about the $180,000 you've been moving through structured deposits. I care about what you've gotten yourself involved in. Nicole's eyes went wide. You've been investigating me? Did you think I wouldn't? I write about criminals for a living, Nicole. I know how to spot them. He leaned forward. Well, I can't figure out his why. We're not desperate for money. I make good money, you make decent money. So why are you helping a criminal move dirty cash? Tears spilled down her cheeks. You don't understand. Kirk, he what? Threatened you? Seduced you? Both. She wrapped her arms around herself. It started as just excitement. Something different. He was dangerous, and that was thrilling. But then he showed me how much money I could make. Just moving some cash around, nothing violent, nothing that hurt anyone. It seemed easy, until it wasn't. Nicole nodded miserably. 2 weeks ago, he told me the people he works for want to expand operations. They need someone to manage a new account, bigger amounts. And when I said I wanted out, she swallowed hard. He said I'm in too deep. That if I try to leave, they'll make sure I go down for everything. Marshall felt a cold fury settle in his chest. Did he threaten Gregory? Her silence was answer enough. Marshall stood, pacing to the window. Outside, their quiet suburban street was dark and peaceful. Gregory's bicycle lay on its side in the driveway, exactly where he'd left it before dinner. Their son, who loved dinosaurs and building blocks and believed his father could fix anything. I can protect you, Nicole said suddenly. Both of you, if I just do what Kirk wants. You're not doing anything else for Kirk Morrow. Marshall's voice was steel. And neither am I. Then what? We go to the police. He has connections. Marshall. He'll know before we even finish giving our statement. I know. Marshall turned to face her. That's why we're not going to the police. Not yet. Over the next 40 minutes, Marshall laid out what he knew. Kirk's organization, his methods, his vulnerabilities. He showed Nicole the evidence he'd gathered. Enough to potentially build a case, but not enough to guarantee conviction, especially with Kirk's connections. So what do we do? Nicole asked, looking more frightened than he'd ever seen her. Marshall's answer was simple. We disappear. Take Gregory and run. But even as he said it, he knew Nicole could see through the lie. They both knew you can't run from people like Kirk Morrow. What Nicole didn't know was that Marshall had no intention of running. The next morning, Marshall dropped Gregory off at his sister Laura Guthrie's house. Laura lived 40 minutes away and had 2 kids of her own, 7-year-old twin girls who adored their cousin. Gregory was thrilled at the prospect of an extended sleepover. "Everything okay?" Laura asked, concerned by the sudden request. "Nicole and I need some time to work through some things," Marshall said, which wasn't technically a lie. "Just a few days." Laura hugged him. "Whatever you need. Take care of yourself." "Okay." From there, Marshall drove to meet Jerry Kaplan at a diner on the outskirts of town. Jerry slid a manila envelope across the table. "Everything you asked for," Jerry said quietly. "But Marshall, I have to ask, what are you planning? The less you know, the better." "That's not reassuring." Marshall opened the envelope. Inside were floor plans for Kirk Morrow's warehouse, obtained through public records and some creative social engineering. There were also profiles on Kirk's known associates: Brett Blake, his muscle; Carlton Gillespie, his accountant; and Anita Gates, a lawyer who'd gotten Kirk out of trouble more than once. "One more thing," Jerry said, sliding a thumb drive across the table. "Security camera footage from the warehouse. A friend owed me a favor." Marshall pocketed the drive. "Thank you. You're going to do something stupid, aren't you?" "I'm going to do something necessary." That afternoon, Marshall received a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk." "The warehouse. 8 p.m. tonight. Come alone, bring Nicole, or your son has an accident at his aunt's house." Marshall stared at the message. Kirk had made his move faster than expected. That meant someone, probably Nicole, had tipped him off about their conversation. He called Nicole immediately. "Did you tell Kirk I know?" Her voice was panicked. "He called me this morning. He knew something was wrong. I didn't know what to do. So you told him everything. He threatened Gregory. What was I supposed to do?" Marshall hung up and immediately called Laura. "Is Gregory okay?" "He's fine, playing in the backyard with the girls." "What?" "Lock all the doors. Don't let anyone in except me. If anyone you don't know tries to approach the house, call 911 immediately." "Marshall, you're scaring me." "Just do it. I'll explain later." He had 7 hours until the meeting. 7 hours to plan what might be the most important scene he'd ever choreographed. Except this time, the stakes were real. Marshall spent the next 2 hours at his home office, making preparations. He assembled items from various locations in the house. A hunting rifle he'd bought for research on a previous novel, but never fired, zip ties from the garage, a digital recorder, his laptop, and several bottles from the medicine cabinet. At 6 p.m., Nicole came home. She found Marshall in the kitchen, calmly making dinner, pasta with marinara sauce, Gregory's favorite. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Making dinner. We have time before the meeting." "How can you be so calm?" "Kirk is going to kill us." Marshall set down the wooden spoon and turned to face her. "No, he's not, because we're going to give him exactly what he wants." "What does that mean?" "It means you're going to play along. We're going to that warehouse. We're going to let Kirk think he's in control." And then he paused. "Then I'm going to do what I do best." "Write about it. Tell a story. Except this time, Kirk Morrow is going to be the victim, and I'm going to make sure everyone believes it." Nicole sank into a chair. "I don't understand." Marshall pulled up a chair next to her and took her hands. For a moment, he saw the woman he'd married. The woman before Kirk, before the lies, before everything fell apart. "I need you to trust me," he said. "Can you do that?" She searched his eyes, then slowly nodded. "Good. Now here's what we're going to do." The warehouse district was deserted at night, exactly as Kirk Morrow preferred. Marshall pulled his sedan into the empty lot at 7:55 p.m., Nicole in the passenger seat. Her hands trembled in her lap. "Remember," Marshall said quietly, "act scared. Act like we're beaten. Make him believe he's won." "I don't have to act," Nicole whispered. They got out of the car. The warehouse door opened, and Brett Blake emerged, 6'4" of muscle and menace. He patted them both down with professional efficiency, confiscating Marshall's phone. Inside, Brett grunted. The warehouse interior was exactly as Marshall had studied it. 40 feet high ceilings, concrete floors, metal support columns every 20 feet. Shipping containers lined one wall. In the center of the space, Kirk Morrow waited, sitting casually on a metal desk, looking like he owned the world. And perhaps, in his mind, He did. Kirk was 42 but looked younger, with the kind of carefully maintained appearance that money could buy. Expensive suit, perfect hair, predatory smile. Marshall Huang, Kirk said, hopping off the desk. The famous crime writer. I've read your books, you know. The Patience of Monsters was particularly good. That scene where the killer uses the victim's own arrogance against them? Chef's kiss. Glad you enjoyed it, Marshall said evenly. Kirk walked a slow circle around them. Nicole tells me you've been investigating me. Found out about our little arrangement. That's disappointing. I thought we could all be adults about this. You threatened my son. Did I? Kirk looked at Nicole with mock surprise. Nicole, did I threaten Gregory? You implied, Nicole started. Implied. That's a writer's word, isn't it, Marshall? Kirk stopped directly in front of him. Let me be less ambiguous. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to forget everything you learned. Nicole is going to continue helping me with my financial logistics. And in exchange, I won't have Brett visit your sister's house to teach Gregory some manners. Brett cracked his knuckles behind them. Marshall didn't flinch. And if I refuse? Kirk pulled a pistol from his jacket pocket. Casual, almost lazy. Then we have a problem. See, I can't have you running to the police. And I can't trust that you won't. You strike me as the heroic type. The kind of man who thinks he can save everyone. He pressed the gun barrel against Marshall's forehead. So, I need you to understand something. I always win. Always. Men like you, with your morals and your rules, you're playing a different game. My game has only one rule. Survive. That's where you're wrong, Marshall said quietly. Kirk's eyes narrowed. Excuse me. You said men let me play by different rules. But you forgot something. Marshall's voice was steady, almost conversational. I don't just write about criminals. I write about how they get caught. I write about their mistakes, their arrogance, their inevitable downfall. I've spent 10 years studying predators like you, Kirk, and you all share the same fatal flaw. Really? What's that? You think you're smarter than everyone else. Kirk laughed, but there was an edge to it. Brett, I think our friend here needs a lesson in humility. The thing is, Marshall continued, you're not the first person to threaten my family. You're not even the most dangerous person I've dealt with. 3 years ago, when I was researching my 4th novel, I interviewed Roland Lamb. Remember him? The securities trader who killed 5 people when they discovered his Ponzi scheme? Kirk's smile faltered. What's your point? My point is that Roland taught me something valuable. He told me the key to committing a perfect crime isn't being smarter than the police. It's being willing to do what others won't. Being willing to cross lines that normal people can't even imagine. And you think you can cross those lines, Marshall? You're a writer. You play pretend for a living. Marshall smiled then, a cold, calculated expression that made Kirk take an involuntary step back. Who do you think helped the police catch Roland Lamb? The FBI tried for 2 years. I figured it out in 6 months. I didn't just interview him, Kirk. I got inside his head, found his weakness, and I handed him to the authorities on a silver platter. Bullshit. Check the acknowledgments in the Patience of Monsters. The FBI thanked me by name. Kirk's certainty wavered. Brett shifted uncomfortably. So here's what's really going to happen, Marshall said. You're going to let us walk out of here. You're going to disappear from our lives. And in exchange, I won't destroy you. Kirk barked a laugh, but it sounded forced. Destroy me? With what? Marshall pulled a small digital recorder from his pocket, the one Brett had somehow missed during the pat-down. With this, and with the cameras I had installed in this warehouse 2 days ago, and with the complete financial records I compiled showing every transaction you've made through Nicole, and with the testimony of Carlton Gillespie, your accountant, who agreed to cooperate with federal prosecutors in exchange for immunity after I showed him the evidence I'd gathered. Kirk's face went pale. You're bluffing. Am I? Carlton's in protective custody as of this morning. The FBI is raiding your other properties right now. And this recording, the part where you threatened my son and pulled a gun on me, that's going to look really bad in court. Brett's hand moved toward his own weapon, but Marshall raised a warning finger. I wouldn't. The moment I don't check in with my lawyer and he glanced at his watch. 12 minutes, everything I've goes to the DA, the FBI, and every news outlet in the city. My publisher's PR team is standing by. They're very good at their jobs. The warehouse fell silent except for the distant sound of sirens. Kirk's face transformed from confusion to rage to terror in the span of 3 seconds. Those sirens are probably for you, Marshall confirmed. I told you, Kirk. I've been studying people like you my entire career. Did you really think I'd walk into your trap without setting one of my own? The sirens grew louder. Brett bolted for the back exit, but the door burst open before he reached it. Federal agents in tactical gear flooded the warehouse, weapons raised. Hands! Show me your hands. Kirk dropped his pistol, hands rising slowly. His eyes locked on Marshall with pure hatred. You son of a bitch. No, Marshall said calmly. I'm a father, and you threatened my son. That was your mistake. As agents cuffed Kirk and Brett, Detective Rhonda McKenzie emerged from the tactical team. She'd been working with the FBI task force for 6 months, trying to build a case against Kirk Morrow. When Marshall had approached her 3 days ago with his evidence, she'd been skeptical. But the files he provided, detailed, documented, legally obtained, had been exactly what they needed. Mr. Huang, she said, nodding respectfully, we'll need you and your wife to come in for official statements. Of course. But first, I need to pick up my son. Nicole stood frozen, watching Kirk being led away. Marshall touched her shoulder gently. It's over, he said. She turned to him, tears streaming. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know. We'll deal with that later. Right now, we need to go get Gregory. But Marshall's plan didn't end with Kirk's arrest. 2 days later, Detective McKenzie called with news that made Marshall's blood run cold. Kirk Morrow had made bail. Some high-priced lawyer, Anita Gates, had gotten him out on a technicality, arguing that the evidence Marshall provided had been obtained through illegal surveillance. The judge reduced it to simple assault for the gun incident. Rhonda explained, frustration evident in her voice. He's wearing an ankle monitor, but he's out. I wanted to warn you. Marshall hung up and immediately called Laura. Keep Gregory there. Don't bring him home yet. Marshall, what's going on? Just do it. Please. That night, Marshall received a text from Kirk's number. Nice try, writer. But I'm still here, and I'm coming for everything you love. Marshall stared at the message, feeling a cold calculation settle over him. He tried the legal route. He trusted the system, and the system had failed. There was only one option left. The next evening, Marshall called Kirk directly. We need to finish this. I agree, Kirk said, his voice smooth and dangerous. My place or yours? Neutral ground. The old Bedford factory. Midnight. Kirk laughed. Classic. The writer chooses a dramatic setting. Fine. But this time, come alone. No FBI. No recordings. Just you and me. We settle this like men. Agreed. But Nicole comes too. I need to know she's safe from your threats. Bring her. Hell, make it a family affair. Marshall hung up and turned to Nicole, who'd been listening. Last chance to back out. She shook her head. I got us into this. I'll see it through. What Nicole didn't know, what no one knew except Marshall, was that he had no intention of fighting Kirk at the Bedford factory. He had something much more permanent in mind. Marshall had spent 3 days preparing for this moment. He'd studied pharmacology texts, consulted with a medical doctor friend under the guise of research for his next novel, and purchased several substances from various sources using untraceable methods. The Bedford factory was indeed abandoned, but Marshall had no intention of meeting Kirk there. Instead, he'd set a different stage entirely, his own home. At 11 p.m., Marshall gave Nicole a mild sedative, telling her it would calm her nerves. She fell asleep on the couch within 20 minutes. Then he got to work. He arranged the basement exactly as he'd planned. 2 chairs, heavy-duty zip ties, a medical stand with bags of saline solution, and other, more specialized additives. Everything looked professional, almost clinical. At 11:45, his doorbell rang. Kirk stood on the porch, Brett Blake beside him. Change of plans, Kirk said, pushing past Marshall into the house. Figured your home was more personal. Marshall had counted on exactly this. Kirk was predictable in his arrogance. Where's Nicole? Kirk demanded. Asleep. The stress got to her. Kirk pulled his gun. Wake her up. I want her to watch what happens to heroes. She's in the basement, Marshall said calmly. I gave her something to help her sleep. Kirk's eyes narrowed with suspicion, but his curiosity won out. He gestured for Brett to follow as Marshall led them down the basement stairs. Nicole was indeed there, slumped in one of the chairs, apparently unconscious. Kirk approached her, then stopped, sniffing the air. "What's that smell?" "Chloroform," Marshall said from behind them. Brett spun around, but Marshall had already triggered the device he'd rigged. A pressurized canister mounted to the ceiling that released a cloud of aerosolized sedative directly into the enclosed space. Kirk managed 2 steps toward the stairs before his legs gave out. Brett collapsed beside him. Marshall, wearing a respirator mask that he'd hidden nearby, watched them fall. Then he got to work. When Kirk woke, his head pounding, he found himself zip-tied to the chair and 4 needle in his arm. Nicole was similarly restrained in the chair beside him, still unconscious. Brett was across the room, also secured. Marshall sat on a stool in front of them, calmly reading from his laptop. "What the fuck did you do?" Kirk croaked. "Something I learned from writing about Richard Crane," Marshall said without looking up. "The serial killer from my second novel. He used a combination of sedatives and paralytic agents to keep his victims conscious but immobile. Fascinating pharmacology, really." Kirk struggled against the restraints, but his body wouldn't cooperate. He could barely move his fingers. "You can't do this," Kirk gasped. "The police will find exactly what I want them to find," Marshall interrupted, finally looking up. "See, Kirk, you made a fatal assumption. You thought because I write fiction, I don't understand reality. But I've spent 10 years studying crimes, talking to killers, learning from prosecutors and detectives. I know exactly how investigations work. I know what evidence they look for, what mistakes criminals make, how to create a narrative that's believable. You're insane." "No, I'm a father protecting his son." Marshall stood and walked closer. "You threatened Gregory. You involved my wife in your criminal enterprise. You tried to destroy my family. I gave you a chance to walk away, to disappear. But you couldn't help yourself. Your arrogance wouldn't let you lose to someone you saw as beneath you." Nicole stirred, moaning softly. Marshall injected something into her foreline, and she settled again. "What are you giving her?" Kirk demanded. "Same thing I'm giving you. A very specific cocktail of drugs. In about 6 hours, when the police arrive, they'll find you and Nicole in this basement. The toxicology will show matching substances in your systems. Substances consistent with a murder-suicide attempt. You see, Kirk, the evidence will tell a very specific story." Marshall pulled up photos on his laptop, showing them to Kirk. "The story will show that you, desperate after your arrest and pending trial, decided to take revenge on the people who betrayed you. You broke into my home. The ankle monitor will show you here. Your prints will be everywhere. You forced Nicole to help you set a trap for me, planning to kill all of us. But something went wrong. Maybe Nicole had second thoughts. Maybe there was a struggle. The physical evidence will support multiple scenarios. No one will believe that," Kirk said, though his voice lacked conviction. "They will when they find your manifesto." Marshall held up a handwritten note. "Your handwriting, by the way. I had you write out several harmless things during our first meeting at the warehouse. Remember signing that receipt for Brett? I've been practicing. Forensic analysis will show it's genuine." Kirk's eyes widened in horror. "The note explains everything." Marshall continued conversationally. "How you couldn't accept defeat. How you blamed Nicole for cooperating with the FBI. How you planned to make us all pay. It's really quite compelling. I might use it in a future novel." "And me?" Kirk whispered. "What happens to me?" "You'll survive, unfortunately. I'm not a killer, Kirk, but you'll spend the next 20 years in federal prison for multiple felonies, including breaking and entering, attempted murder, and violating your bail conditions. Brett, too. The evidence is overwhelming. And the beautiful thing is, everything I'm doing right now, completely legal. You broke into my home. I defended my family using non-lethal means. The drugs in your system will be explained by your suicide attempt. Nicole's involvement will be seen as coerced. You can't. I already have." Marshall checked his watch. "The police will be here in exactly 4.5 hours. Gregory will arrive shortly before them, as I planned. He'll walk in and find this scene, exactly as I've arranged it. He'll be traumatized, of course, but he'll also be safe, and you'll never threaten him again." Kirk tried to speak, but his voice failed. The paralytic was taking full effect. Marshall leaned in close. "I told you I study criminals. But what I didn't tell you is that I also study justice, real justice, the kind that protects the innocent and punishes the guilty. You're going away, Kirk, forever, and the world will remember you as a monster who tried to murder a family out of revenge." He straightened up and returned to his laptop. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have some final details to arrange. Try to rest. You're going to need your strength for the trial." At 3:17 a.m., 6-year-old Gregory Huang pushed through the heavy glass doors of the police station, his Spider-Man pajamas soaked with what appeared to be blood. Actually theatrical blood from a special effects supply company that Marshall had purchased weeks earlier and carefully applied to his sleeping son before driving him to the station and parking around the corner. The timing was perfect. The sedatives in Kirk and Nicole's systems would have exactly the effect Marshall wanted: alive, recoverable, but disoriented enough to make their testimonies confused and contradictory. As Detective McKenzie took the note from Gregory's hand, Marshall's carefully crafted plan unfolded exactly as he'd written it. The note, in Gregory's careful child's handwriting, coached by Marshall the day before during what Gregory thought was a secret mission game, read, "Daddy said Mommy needs help in the basement. The bad man is there too. Daddy said to tell you he stopped them, but he's hurt. Please come quick." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Squad cars, ambulances, and SWAT teams descended on the Huang residence within 8 minutes. What they found was exactly what Marshall had staged: Kirk Morrow and Nicole Huang in the basement, both alive but sedated, surrounded by evidence of a violent confrontation. Brett Blake was discovered in the same condition, having apparently been Kirk's accomplice in the break-in. Marshall himself was found on the kitchen floor, conscious but injured, a carefully self-inflicted wound to his shoulder that looked defensive in nature, treated with enough of his own blood to appear dramatic but not life-threatening. The narrative practically wrote itself. Kirk Morrow, released on bail and furious at his impending prosecution, had broken into the Huang home to exact revenge. He'd forced Nicole at gunpoint to help subdue Marshall, planning to kill them both and make it look like a murder-suicide. But Marshall, the clever crime writer, had turned the tables using his knowledge of sedatives and tactical planning. In the struggle, Marshall was injured but managed to subdue both Kirk and Brett using chemical means he'd researched for his novels. By the time the sun rose, Kirk Morrow was in custody in the hospital ward, under armed guard, facing multiple felony charges that would ensure he'd never be free again. Brett Blake faced similar charges as an accomplice. Nicole was hospitalized but cleared of wrongdoing. The evidence showed she'd been coerced and had ultimately cooperated with Marshall to stop Kirk. The trace amounts of sedative in her system were explained as Kirk's attempt to incapacitate her. The media descended on the story within hours. Crime novelist stops home invasion using his own research. Marshall's publicist couldn't have planned better coverage. Detective Rhonda McKenzie, reviewing the evidence 3 days later, sat across from Marshall in the hospital room where he was recovering. "Your story checks out," she said, but her eyes were thoughtful. "Every detail. The forced entry, the struggle, the chemical substances, the timing. It all fits perfectly. I'm glad you caught him," Marshall said carefully. "It's almost too perfect," Rhonda continued. Like someone who knew exactly how an investigation would unfold, arranged everything to support a specific narrative. Marshall met her gaze steadily. "I write crime fiction, detective. I suppose some of that knowledge became useful when I needed to defend my family." She studied him for a long moment. "Kirk Morrow is claiming he was set up, that you lured him to your house, drugged him, and staged the entire scene. Kirk Morrow is a criminal facing multiple federal charges who just violated his bail conditions. I'd expect him to say anything to save himself. And the timing? Your son arriving at the police station at exactly the right moment. I gave him instructions in case something bad happened. I want to make sure he'd be safe and that help would come. Is that so suspicious?" Rhonda tapped her pen against her notepad. "No, it's actually quite smart. Almost like you planned for every contingency. I have a 6-year-old son, detective. Of course I plan for contingencies. After a long pause, Rhonda closed her notepad. Well, Mr. Huang, it seems you're quite the hero. The DA is moving forward with multiple charges against Morrow. With the evidence from this incident plus the original case, he's looking at 25 to 30 years. Good. As Rhonda stood to leave, she paused at the door. You know what's interesting? In all your novels, the criminals always make one fatal mistake. They get arrogant, they miss a detail, they underestimate someone. Kirk Morrow certainly did that. Most criminals do. Yes. But in your books, the heroes also tend to be one step ahead. They anticipate the criminal's moves. They plan for every possibility. They're willing to cross certain lines to achieve justice. Marshall said nothing. I guess life imitates art sometimes, Rhonda said finally. Take care of that shoulder, Mr. Huang. And your son. He's been through a lot. I will. Thank you, detective. After she left, Marshall stared out the hospital window at the city below. Somewhere in that city, Kirk Morrow sat in a cell, his empire crumbling, his future destroyed. Brett Blake faced similar fates. Anita Gates had already distanced herself from Kirk, refusing to represent him further. It wasn't the ending Marshall had originally planned. He'd hoped the legal system would work the first time. But when it failed, he'd adapted. He'd used his skills, his knowledge, and yes, his willingness to cross certain lines to protect what mattered most. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Laura entered with Gregory, who ran to his father's bedside. Daddy, are you okay? Marshall pulled his son into a careful hug, mindful of his wounded shoulder. I'm fine, buddy. The doctors say I'll be home in a few days. Did we stop the bad man? Like in the secret mission? We did. You were very brave. You did exactly what I told you. Gregory beamed with pride, not understanding the full weight of what had happened, only knowing that he'd helped his father. Laura hung back, her expression concerned. Marshall, we need to talk. About Nicole. Later, Marshall said quietly. Not in front of Gregory. Nicole remained hospitalized for psychological evaluation. The truth was more complex than anyone knew. She had been coerced by Kirk, but she'd also made choices that endangered their family. Marshall had saved her life and her freedom, but their marriage was over. Some betrayals couldn't be forgiven, even when you understood them. But that was a problem for another day. For now, Marshall held his son and looked toward a future where Kirk Morrow would never threaten them again. 6 weeks later, Marshall sat in the courtroom as Kirk Morrow was sentenced to 28 years in federal prison. The judge cited the particularly heinous nature of threatening a child and the clear danger to society in handing down the maximum sentence. Kirk's eyes found Marshall in the gallery. There was hatred there, yes, but also a grudging respect. He knew he'd been beaten by someone who'd thought 3 steps ahead of him. As Kirk was led away in chains, Marshall felt no triumph, only relief. He walked out of the courthouse to find Jerry Kaplan waiting with a coffee. It's done, Jerry said. It's done, Marshall agreed. You going to write about it? Marshall considered the question. Maybe. Someday. After Gregory's old enough to understand. What about Nicole? We're divorcing. She's entering a treatment program. She cooperated fully with the investigation. She'll be okay eventually. They walked together toward Marshall's car, where Laura was waiting with Gregory. You know, Jerry said carefully, I've known you 10 years. I watched you research some dark stuff for your novels, but I've never seen you apply it like this. I did what I had to do to protect my son. I know. I'm not judging. Hell, I'm impressed. But Marshall, Jerry stopped walking, facing his friend. Was it all worth it? The planning, the risk, he searched for the right word. The manipulation? Marshall watched Gregory playing with his cousins near Laura's car, laughing and carefree, unburdened by the darkness that had threatened to consume their family. Yes, Marshall said simply. Every second of it. 3 months later, Marshall published a new novel, The Father's Game. It told the story of a writer who uses his knowledge of criminal psychology to protect his family from a dangerous criminal. Critics called it his most personal and powerful work yet. The dedication read, for Gregory, may you never need to become what I had to become. Kirk Morrow, reading a contraband copy in his prison cell years later, would recognize certain details and understand the final insult. Marshall had turned their confrontation into a bestseller, profiting from Kirk's downfall while Kirk rotted in a federal prison. The book's final line would haunt Kirk for years. The greatest justice is not revenge, but the certainty that evil will be remembered for what it truly is, defeated. Marshall never wrote another crime novel after that. He didn't need to. He'd lived through the only story that truly mattered, the one where a father did whatever it took to save his son. And Gregory, growing up safe and loved, would never know the full extent of what his father had planned, sacrificed, and executed to ensure that safety. Some stories, Marshall decided, were better left untold. At least until Gregory was old enough to understand that sometimes the monsters weren't in books. Sometimes they were in your basement, exactly where they belonged. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Family Gathering. Blake Morrison sat at the mahogany dining table, his calloused hands folded as he watched his father-in-law Raymond Kellerman distribute envelopes to the grandchildren. The 72-year-old patriarch of the Kellerman fortune moved with theatrical precision, his silver hair perfectly styled, his expensive suit immaculate. "Emma, darling," Raymond cooed to Blake's 14-year-old niece, Nicole's sister's daughter. "Your college fund just got a significant boost." The girl squealed with delight as she opened the envelope, revealing a check for $50,000. Blake's jaw tightened as he glanced at his 8-year-old son Tyler, who sat quietly beside him, dark eyes watching his grandfather with a mixture of hope and uncertainty. The boy had inherited Blake's angular features, but Nicole's softer expressions, creating a face that could melt hearts when he smiled. "And Marcus," Raymond continued, addressing Nicole's brother's 12-year-old son, "I've arranged for that summer program in Switzerland you wanted." Another envelope, another life-changing gift. Blake had married into the Kellerman family 5 years ago, bringing with him his son from his first marriage to Lisa, who had died in a car accident when Tyler was 3. The Kellermans had initially welcomed Blake, impressed by his successful security consulting firm and his decorated military background. But Blake had always sensed an undercurrent of disapproval, particularly from Raymond. Nicole squeezed Blake's hand under the table, her wedding ring catching the light from the crystal chandelier. At 34, she was still stunning. Blonde hair cascading over her shoulders, blue eyes that had once looked at Blake with genuine love. Now, as he studied her profile, he noticed she avoided his gaze. "Tyler, sweetheart," Raymond's voice cut through Blake's thoughts. "Come here to Grandpa." The boy approached cautiously. Raymond's smile turned cold as he patted Tyler's head with the mechanical affection one might show a neighbor's pet. "You're a good boy, Tyler, but you understand, these trust funds, the cars when you turn 16, the family vacations to Europe, they're for family. Real family." The words hung in the air like poison gas. "You're not really family, son. You're Blake's boy." The silence that followed was deafening. Blake felt his blood temperature drop to Arctic levels, the way it did before he eliminated targets during his years in military intelligence. His wife said nothing. Not a word of defense for her stepson, not even a sharp intake of breath. Tyler's face crumpled for just a moment before he composed himself with dignity that broke Blake's heart. "Understand, Grandpa," the boy whispered, returning to his seat. Blake's mind cataloged every face at the table. Nicole's mother Patricia looked uncomfortable but remained silent. Nicole's siblings exchanged glances but said nothing. His wife, the woman who had promised to love and protect Tyler as her own, stared at her plate. "Actually," Blake said, his voice deadly calm, "Tyler does understand perfectly." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a sealed envelope, sliding it across the polished table to his son. "And I think it's time he gave you something, Raymond." Tyler took the envelope with trembling hands. Blake had prepared this document months ago, After noticing subtle changes in Nicole's behavior, after installing security cameras in their home during a routine upgrade, after discovering things that made his blood run cold. "Tyler," Blake said gently, "remember what I told you? If Grandpa ever hurt you again, you're to give him that envelope." The boy's face brightened with sudden understanding. He stood up and walked to Raymond with newfound confidence. "Grandpa, Dad told me to give this to you if you ever hurt me again." Raymond opened the envelope with irritated curiosity. As his eyes scanned the contents, his face went white, then red, then white again. The document contained photographs, timestamps, and details that made him understand just who Blake Morrison really was and what he was capable of. Raymond's scream echoed through the dining room, a sound of pure terror that would haunt the Kellerman family for years to come. Chapter 2. The Web of Lies. 3 hours after the dinner from hell, Blake sat in his home office, watching security footage on his computer while Tyler slept peacefully upstairs. The boy had handled the evening with remarkable grace, even asking Blake if they could get ice cream on the way home to celebrate Grandpa's surprise. Blake's background wasn't something he discussed at cocktail parties. 12 years in Army intelligence, specializing in psychological operations and information warfare. After Lisa's death, he transitioned to private security consulting, building a legitimate business that served as a front for more specialized services. Governments and corporations paid him extraordinary sums to solve problems that couldn't be handled through conventional channels. The doorbell rang at 11:47 p.m. Blake checked the security monitor. Derek Sullivan stood on his doorstep, looking agitated. Derek was Nicole's college friend who had recently moved back to town, supposedly to start a real estate business. Tall, athletic, with the kind of easy charm that made people trust him immediately. Blake had never liked him. "Blake!" Derek's voice carried a forced casualness as Blake opened the door. "Is Nicole home? I need to talk to her about something urgent." "She's asleep," Blake replied, studying Derek's micro-expressions. Dilated pupils, elevated heart rate visible in his neck pulse, defensive posture. Classic signs of deception and anxiety. "It's about the Whitmore property deal. She asked me to stop by if I heard anything, regardless of the time." Blake knew Nicole had no involvement in any Whitmore property deal. "I'll let her know you stopped by." Derek's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Maybe I could just—" "She's asleep," Blake repeated, his tone carrying the subtle threat of finality. After Derek left, Blake reviewed the security footage from the past 3 months with military precision. The pattern was clear. Nicole leaving the house during Tyler's school hours, returning exactly 43 minutes later. Her phone GPS disabled during these absences. Derek's car spotted in the parking lot of the Riverside Hotel during corresponding time periods. But the real revelation came from the audio surveillance he'd installed in Nicole's car during her last service appointment. The recordings painted a picture that made Blake's blood turn to ice water. "When are you going to tell him?" Derek's voice, recorded 2 weeks earlier. "I can't. Not yet. Blake isn't. He's not someone you just divorce and walk away from. You don't understand what he's capable of." "Then we stick to the plan. The trust fund money, the property investments, will have enough to disappear completely. Start fresh somewhere Blake can never find us." "What about Tyler?" "What about him? He's not your kid, Nicole. You said so yourself. You only married Blake for security after your dad's gambling debts nearly destroyed the family. The kid's just collateral damage." Blake had heard enough. He spent the next hour researching Derek's background, using resources most private citizens couldn't access. What he found was interesting. Derek Sullivan had been married twice before, both marriages ending with mysterious disappearances of marital assets. The man was a predator, and Nicole was his latest mark. But Nicole's betrayal cut deeper than Derek's manipulation. She had used Blake to solve her family's financial problems, used Tyler as a prop in her charade, and now planned to rob them both before vanishing. Blake opened his laptop and began typing. By morning, he would have a comprehensive plan that would make both Derek and Nicole understand what happened when someone betrayed Blake Morrison. The document he'd given Raymond was just the opening move. He glanced at Tyler's photo on his desk. His son deserved better than this family of liars and parasites. and Blake would make sure he got it, no matter the cost. Chapter 3. The Revelation. Blake woke at 0500 hours, as he had every day for the past 15 years. Military habits died hard, and this morning he was grateful for the discipline. Today would require surgical precision. Nicole was still asleep, her blonde hair fanned across the pillow. She looked peaceful, innocent even. Blake studied her face, remembering the woman he'd thought he married. Kind, loving, someone who had promised to be a mother to Tyler. The reality was more complex and infinitely more dangerous. He moved silently through his morning routine, preparing Tyler's breakfast and packing his lunch. The boy appeared at 0630, sleep-tousled and still processing the events of the previous evening. "Dad," Tyler said as he ate his cereal, "why did Grandpa scream like that?" Blake sat down across from his son, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes people get scared when they realize they've made a mistake, buddy. Your grandfather learned something about himself last night that he didn't like. Are we in trouble? You and I? Never. We're a team, remember? Morrison men stick together." Tyler's smile could have powered the house. "Morrison men stick together," he repeated solemnly. After dropping Tyler at school, Blake returned home to find Nicole in the kitchen, wearing the silk robe he'd bought her for their anniversary. She looked nervous, which was smart of her. "Blake, about last night." "What about it?" He poured himself coffee, his tone neutral. "Dad was out of line. Tyler is family, and I should have said something." Blake turned to face her, noting the slight tremor in her hands, the way she couldn't maintain eye contact. "Should have, yes. But you didn't." "I was shocked. I didn't know how to respond." "You knew exactly how to respond, Nicole. You chose not to." She moved closer, placing her hand on his chest in a gesture that once would have comforted him. Now it felt like a snake coiling around his heart. "Let me make it up to both of you. I'll talk to Dad today, demand he apologize to Tyler, and include him in everything. I'll threaten to cut contact if he doesn't." Blake studied her face, marveling at how convincing she could be. If he hadn't heard the recordings, seen the evidence, he might have believed her. "That's very generous," he said finally. Relief flooded her features. "I love you, Blake. And I love Tyler. This family means everything to me. I know exactly what this family means to you, Nicole." Something in his tone made her step back, but before she could respond, the doorbell rang. Blake answered it to find a courier with an envelope addressed to Nicole. "Mrs. Morrison, I need your signature." Nicole signed for the package with shaking hands. Inside was a single photograph and a note. Blake watched her face drain of color as she saw Derek's car at the Riverside Hotel, timestamp clearly visible. The note was simple. "We need to talk. All three of us. Tonight, 8 p.m., the warehouse on Industrial Boulevard. Come alone, both of you. Tyler will be safe at his sleepover at the Matthews house, which I've already arranged. P.S. Derek's marriage history makes for fascinating reading." Nicole looked up at Blake, and for the first time since he'd known her, she looked genuinely terrified. "Blake, I can explain. I'm sure you can. You've always been good with words." He took the photograph from her trembling hands. "But I think it's time for the truth, don't you? All of it." The warehouse meeting would be where everything came to light. Blake had spent months preparing for this moment, and tonight, Nicole and Derek would discover what happened when someone tried to manipulate a man who had spent years perfecting the art of psychological warfare. But first, he had a phone call to make to Tyler's teacher, confirming the sleepover that would keep his son safely away from what was about to unfold. Morrison men stuck together, and Blake would do whatever it took to protect the only family that truly mattered. Chapter 4. The Architect of Ruin. Blake Morrison's warehouse sat in the industrial district like a tomb waiting for its occupants. He'd purchased the building 3 years earlier through a shell company, officially for storage of his security consulting equipment. Unofficially, it served as a place where Blake could work on problems that required privacy. At 1900 hours, Blake made his final preparations. The warehouse was equipped with soundproofing that would make a recording studio jealous, security cameras with night vision capabilities, and enough backup power to run independently for weeks. What Nicole and Derek didn't know was that this meeting had been planned for months, ever since Blake first suspected his wife's betrayal. His phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. Having fun at Tommy's. His mom made pizza shaped like dinosaurs. Love you, Dad. Blake smiled, genuinely for the first time in weeks. After tonight, Tyler would never have to endure another moment of the Kellerman family's toxic dysfunction. Blake would make sure of that. The sound of car engines announced the arrival of his guests. Through the security monitors, Blake watched Nicole and Derek exit their respective vehicles. Nicole wore a black dress that Blake had once told her made her look stunning. Derek was in a suit, probably thinking he could intimidate or charm his way out of whatever was coming. They were about to learn that Blake Morrison was neither intimidated nor charmed by anything. Blake opened the warehouse door as they approached. The vast space was dimly lit, with 3 chairs arranged in the center under a single bright light. It had the theatrical quality of an interrogation room, which was exactly what Blake intended. "Please sit," Blake said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. Derek glanced around nervously. "Blake, man, I think there's been some misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding." Blake remained standing, positioning himself where he could watch both of their faces. "I know about the affair. I know about the plan to steal money from Nicole's trust fund. I know about your history. Derek, 2 previous wives, both of whom discovered their assets mysteriously vanishing around the time you disappeared from their lives." Nicole's face went white. "Blake, please. I know you married me to solve your family's debt problems, Nicole. I know you've been lying about loving Tyler, about wanting to be his mother. I have recordings of every conversation you've had in your car for the past 3 months." Derek started to stand, but Blake's gaze froze him in place. There was something in Blake's eyes that spoke of violence held in check by the thinnest of margins. "Here's what's going to happen," Blake continued, his voice conversational. "Derek, you're going to return every penny you've manipulated from Nicole, plus interest. You're also going to transfer ownership of the properties you purchased with stolen money to a trust fund for Tyler." "You can't prove anything," Derek said, but his voice lacked conviction. Blake smiled, the expression more terrifying than any scowl. "I don't need to prove anything to a court, Derek. I just need to prove it to the people who matter. Your business partners, for instance. The ones who don't know about your creative financing methods." He clicked a remote, and a large monitor descended from the ceiling. The screen displayed financial records, photographs, and what appeared to be surveillance footage of Derek entering and leaving various locations. "Nicole, you're going to sign divorce papers tonight. You'll receive exactly what you brought into this marriage. Nothing. Tyler will remain with me, and you'll relinquish all parental claims." "I won't sign anything," Nicole said, finding her voice. "You can't force me to." "Your father's gambling debts," Blake interrupted. "The ones I paid off to save your family from bankruptcy? They're going to resurface. With interest. And I have documentation showing that the money I used came from my security business, which means those debts are now legally tied to certain international obligations that your father definitely cannot repay." The color drained from Nicole's face completely. Blake's security business did indeed have international clients, the kind who collected debts through methods that didn't involve lawyers. "You're insane," Derek whispered. "I'm thorough," Blake corrected. "I'm also patient, methodical, and utterly without mercy when someone threatens what I love. And I love exactly 2 people on this planet, my son Tyler and the memory of his mother Lisa." Blake walked to a wall panel and opened it, revealing a collection of photographs and documents. "Derek, your real name is David Kramer. You've been running marriage scams for 8 years. Your first wife, Jennifer, didn't leave you. She's in a mental health facility in Nevada, convinced she's lost her mind because her husband and all her money vanished on the same day." Derek's composure cracked completely. "How could you possibly? Your second wife, Maria, moved back to Mexico believing she was cursed. Interesting pattern. You don't just steal money. You psychologically destroy these women so they won't come looking for you." Blake turned to Nicole. "Did he tell you about them? About what he does to women who trust him?" Nicole looked at Derek with dawning horror. "You said you'd been married before, but you told me they were amicable divorces." "He lied, Nicole. Just like you lied to me. Just like you both lied to Tyler every time you pretended to care about him." The warehouse fell silent except for the hum of machinery. Blake watched as his wife and her lover processed the reality of their situation. They had tried to manipulate a predator, and now they were discovering what that felt like from the prey's perspective. "I have a counter-proposal," Blake said finally. "Derek, you disappear tonight. Forever. I don't care where you go, but if I ever see you again, if you ever contact Nicole again, if you ever run another marriage scam, I will personally ensure that Jennifer and Maria learn exactly where to find you. And I'll make sure they have the resources to express their feelings appropriately." Derek nodded frantically. "I'll leave. Tonight. I swear. Nicole, you have a choice. Sign the divorce papers, take nothing, and walk away quietly. Or I release everything I have about your family to the IRS, the FBI, and several other agencies that take a dim view of the creative accounting methods your father used to hide his gambling losses." Blake's phone chimed with another text from Tyler. "Dad, Tommy's mom wants to know if you want her to save you some pizza." Blake typed back, "Tell her thank you, but Dad's having dinner with some people who are about to lose their appetite." When he looked up, both Nicole and Derek were staring at him with pure terror. "You have until tomorrow at noon to make your decisions," Blake said. "After that, I implement Plan B. And trust me, you don't want to know what Plan B looks like." Chapter 5. The Psychological Minefield. Blake didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat in his home office, monitoring the surveillance feeds he'd placed on both Nicole and Derek's properties months earlier. Predictable as clockwork, Derek had gone home and immediately started packing. By 0300 hours, his car was loaded and heading toward the interstate. One problem solved, one remaining. Nicole had returned to their house and spent the night pacing, making phone calls and crying. Blake watched her through the bedroom security camera as she called her father, her siblings, even her mother, but no one answered. Blake had made sure of that by timing his revelation for when Raymond would be on his weekly poker night, a high-stakes game where phones were confiscated to prevent cheating. At 0700 hours, Blake prepared breakfast for one. Nicole appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking like she'd aged a decade overnight. "Blake, we need to talk." "No," he said without looking up from his coffee. "We don't. You need to decide, and I need to pick up Tyler from his sleepover. Please, just listen." Blake turned to face her, and whatever she saw in his expression made her step backward. "I listened for 3 months, Nicole. I listened to you lie to my face while you planned to rob me and abandon my son. I listened to you tell Derek that Tyler was just collateral damage. I listened to you laugh about how easy it was to manipulate me into paying your family's debts." His voice remained calm, conversational, which somehow made it more terrifying. "The time for listening is over." Nicole's phone rang. She answered it with shaking hands, putting it on speaker. Her father's voice filled the kitchen, wild with panic. "Nicole, what the hell did you do? My poker game got raided last night. FBI, IRS, everybody. They're saying I owe millions in back taxes and penalties. They froze all my accounts." Blake smiled slightly. The poker game raid was a beautiful piece of coordination, requiring only a few well-placed calls to the right people and some carefully leaked information about Raymond's creative bookkeeping methods. "Dad, and Derek Sullivan, or whatever his real name is, he's disappeared. His real estate office is empty, his bank account closed. There are women calling, saying he stole their life savings. What kind of man were you involved with?" Nicole looked at Blake with growing horror as the scope of his planning became clear. "I have to go, Dad," she whispered, ending the call. "He'll be fine," Blake said conversationally. "Eventually, the gambling debts are real, but they're manageable if he cooperates with the investigation and pays his taxes like a good citizen. The alternative is less pleasant." Blake's phone rang. Tyler's excited voice filled the kitchen through the speaker. "Dad, Mrs. Matthews says you can come get me anytime. We made pancakes shaped like Batman." "I'll be there in an hour, buddy. Did you remember to thank Mrs. Matthews for letting you stay over?" "Already did. She says I have really good manners. She also says if you ever need help with me, she'd be happy to babysit anytime because I'm a delight." Blake felt genuine warmth for the first time in hours. "You are indeed a delight. I'll see you soon." After ending the call, Blake found Nicole staring at him with a mixture of fear and something that might have been respect. You planned all of this, she said. From the beginning, I planned for the possibility. I hoped I was wrong. Blake finished his coffee and rinsed the cup. But I've learned that when you love someone, you prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. What happens to me? That depends entirely on what you choose. Sign the papers, and you walk away with your freedom and a chance to rebuild your life honestly. Refuse, and you'll discover that I have a very long reach and an even longer memory. Blake checked his watch. You have 3 hours to decide. I'm going to get Tyler, and we're going to have a normal Saturday, playground, ice cream, maybe a movie. When we get home, I expect to find either signed divorce papers or an empty house. He headed toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Nicole, if you're thinking about running, remember that Derek thought the same thing. Ask yourself, if I could orchestrate his disappearance and your father's problems overnight, what exactly do you think I can do with more time? As Blake drove toward Tyler's sleepover, he reflected on the psychology of betrayal. People like Nicole and Derek operated under the assumption that others shared their flexible relationship with truth and loyalty. They couldn't comprehend someone who planned for betrayal not out of cynicism, but out of love. Tyler deserved a father who would protect him from the sharks of the world. And Blake Morrison had spent his entire adult life learning how to hunt sharks. Chapter 6: The Point of No Return. Tyler bounced in the passenger seat as they drove home from their perfect Saturday, chattering about Batman pancakes and the fort he'd built with Tommy Matthews. Blake listened with genuine attention, filing away every detail. These moments, pure, honest, filled with a child's unguarded joy, were what made everything else worthwhile. Dad, why do you think Grandpa Raymond was so mean last night? Blake considered his answer carefully. Some people are afraid of love they can't control, buddy. Your grandfather is used to people wanting things from him. So when he meets someone who doesn't, it scares him. Do you want things from him? I want him to treat you with respect. That's all. Tyler nodded solemnly. Tommy's grandpa taught him how to fish. He says grandpas are supposed to teach you stuff and take you places and brag about you to their friends. Blake's jaw tightened. Maybe we'll find you a better grandpa. As they pulled into their driveway, Blake noticed Nicole's car was still there. He also noticed the additional vehicle parked across the street, a black SUV with government plates. Interesting. Tyler, run inside and get cleaned up. Then we'll decide what movie to watch. Blake waited until Tyler was inside before approaching the SUV. The window rolled down to reveal Agent Sarah Hendricks, an old colleague from his military intelligence days. Blake, heard you've been stirring up some federal databases lately. Sarah, lovely to see you. How's the Bureau treating you? Can't complain. Though I have to ask, Raymond Kellerman? Really? The man hasn't filed an honest tax return since the Clinton administration. Blake smiled. Shocking. I had no idea. Of course you didn't. Sarah's expression turned serious. We've also got reports about a Derek Sullivan, real name David Kramer, who seems to have vanished into thin air just as several federal agencies were taking interest in his activities. Tragic. I hope he's somewhere warm. Blake, what are you doing? Protecting my son from people who would use him and discard him. Nothing more, nothing less. Sarah studied his face. The old Blake Morrison I knew would have just quietly filed for divorce and moved on. The old Blake Morrison didn't have Tyler. After Sarah drove away, Blake entered his house to find Nicole in the living room. Divorce papers spread across the coffee table. She was signing each page with mechanical precision, tears streaming down her face. Tyler ran down the stairs, freshly showered and wearing his favorite Superman pajamas. He stopped when he saw Nicole crying. Nicole, are you okay? She looked up at the boy she'd pretended to love, the child she'd planned to abandon, and for a moment her composure cracked completely. I'm fine, sweetheart. Just saying goodbye. Tyler looked confused. Are you going somewhere? Blake stepped forward. Nicole has decided she needs to go live somewhere else for a while. It doesn't have anything to do with you, buddy. Sometimes adults make choices that are hard to understand. Nicole finished signing the papers and stood. She walked over to Tyler and knelt down to his level. Tyler, I want you to know that you deserve all the love in the world. Your dad loves you more than anything, and you should never forget that. For a moment, Blake saw a flicker of the woman he'd thought he married, the one who might have genuinely cared for Tyler if her own greed hadn't gotten in the way. "Will I see you again?" Tyler asked. Nicole glanced at Blake, who gave an almost imperceptible shake of his head. "Maybe someday," she whispered, then kissed Tyler's forehead. "Be good for your dad, okay?" After Nicole left, Tyler curled up next to Blake on the couch, clearly confused but not devastated. Blake realized that Nicole's emotional distance over the past months had already prepared Tyler for her absence. "Dad, are we going to be okay?" "Just us." Blake pulled his son closer. "We're going to be better than okay. We're going to be free. Morris and men stick together," Tyler said sleepily. "Always," Blake confirmed. As Tyler fell asleep against his shoulder, Blake's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This isn't over. You've made enemies, Blake. Watch your back." Blake deleted the message without concern. He'd been making enemies his entire adult life, and he was still here while most of them weren't. What mattered now was building a future where Tyler would never again be subjected to people who saw him as disposable. The war was far from over, but Blake had won the first major battle, and he was just getting started. Chapter 7: Ghosts and Consequences. 3 months after Nicole signed the divorce papers, Blake's life had settled into a rhythm that worked. Tyler thrived without the underlying tension that had permeated their house during Nicole's final months. They'd established new routines: Saturday morning fishing trips, Thursday night pizza and homework sessions, bedtime stories that Blake sometimes made up featuring a boy detective who always outsmarted the bad guys. But Blake knew better than to mistake calm for peace. People like Raymond Kellerman and the network Nicole had belonged to didn't simply accept defeat and move on. They regrouped, planned, and struck back when their targets felt safe. The first sign of retaliation came on a Tuesday morning when Blake's security consulting business suddenly lost 3 major contracts in a single day. The stated reasons were budget restructuring and strategic realignment, but Blake recognized the coordinated nature of the attacks. Someone with significant influence was pressuring his clients. The second sign was Tyler coming home from school with a black eye. "What happened?" Blake asked, kneeling to examine his son's face. "Some kids at school said their parents told them my family are criminals. Marcus, Aunt Emma's son, he said you made Grandpa Raymond lose all his money, and that makes me a thief's kid." Blake felt the familiar coldness settle over him, the temperature drop that preceded violence. But Tyler needed comfort, not revenge. "Not yet." "What did you do?" "I told them you're the best dad in the world, and they don't know what they're talking about. Then Marcus pushed me, so I pushed him back." Tyler looked worried. "Did I do the right thing?" "You defended your family. That's always right." Blake hugged his son gently. "But I think it's time we had a conversation with Marcus's parents." That evening, Blake received a call from Nicole's sister Emma. "Blake, I think we need to talk." "About Marcus giving Tyler a black eye?" "Yes, I think we do." "About your systematic destruction of our family. Dad's in the hospital, stress-induced heart attack. Mom's had to sell the house. And now Nicole. No one's heard from her in weeks." Blake's voice remained neutral. "I'm sorry to hear about Raymond's health." As for Nicole, she made her choices. "Choices?" Emma's voice rose. "You manipulated her into signing away her rights to Tyler, then terrorized her into disappearing. I gave her evidence of her affair and embezzlement plans, then offered her a clean exit. She took it. You destroyed her life. She destroyed her own life when she chose to betray the people who loved her." There was a long silence before Emma spoke again, her voice colder now. "You made enemies, Blake. Our family has resources, connections. You might want to remember that." "Emma," Blake said quietly, "you might want to remember that I've spent my career dealing with people who think they're untouchable because of their resources and connections. It never ends well for them." After ending the call, Blake did what he always did when threatened. He gathered intelligence. Within hours, he had a complete picture of the Kellerman family's current situation and their likely next moves. Raymond was indeed in the hospital, but his heart attack had been triggered by FBI raids on his properties and the discovery of decades of tax evasion and money laundering. The man's gambling debts were the least of his problems now. Emma and her husband were coordinating a campaign to turn Tyler's school community against Blake, spreading rumors about his business and his violent background. They'd also hired a private investigator to find evidence of wrongdoing they could use against him. Most interesting was what Blake discovered about Nicole's current location. She hadn't vanished. She was living in a small apartment across town, working as a waitress and attending community college. She'd honored their agreement and stayed away from Tyler, but someone was watching her, reporting her activities back to the Kellerman family. Blake realized that the Kellermans were using Nicole as bait, hoping Blake would contact her and give them evidence of continued harassment or manipulation. They didn't understand that Blake had no interest in Nicole's new life as long as she stayed away from Tyler. But they were about to learn that using Tyler as a weapon against Blake was the gravest mistake they could make. Chapter 8. The Hunted. Blake's counterstrike began at dawn on Friday morning. He'd spent the night preparing, and by the time Tyler left for school, Blake had already initiated a sequence of events that would remind the Kellerman family why challenging him had been a catastrophic error in judgment. The first call went to Agent Sarah Hendricks at the FBI. "Sarah, I have information about a private investigator named Jim Castellanos who's been conducting illegal surveillance and harassment operations targeting federal witnesses." "Blake, what are you?" "Jim's been hired by the Kellerman family to build a case against me. The problem is some of his surveillance involves Tyler, and Tyler is technically under federal protection due to his connection to my previous intelligence work." This was true, though Blake had never mentioned it to anyone. Tyler's status as the child of a former intelligence operative automatically qualified him for certain protections, especially when foreign nationals were involved, which they were given Blake's international client base. "I'll look into it," Sarah said. "I'd recommend moving quickly. Jim's been photographing Tyler at school, following him to friends' houses. If anything happens to my son because the Bureau failed to protect him," Blake didn't need to finish the threat. Sarah understood that Blake Morrison with a grievance was exponentially more dangerous than Blake Morrison conducting business. The second call went to Tommy Matthews' mother, whose husband happened to be the superintendent of Tyler School District. "Mrs. Matthews, this is Blake Morrison. I wanted to thank you again for including Tyler in so many activities with Tommy. He's a wonderful boy, Blake. Tommy adores him. I'm glad. Unfortunately, we're dealing with some family drama that might spill over into the school environment. Tyler's mother's family is, let's say, they're having legal troubles, and they're trying to deflect blame onto Tyler and me. If anyone approaches you or the school with allegations about our family, I'd appreciate a call before any action is taken. Of course, has Tyler been having problems at school? Some children have been repeating things their parents told them. Marcus Kellerman gave Tyler a black eye yesterday." Mrs. Matthews' voice went cold. "I wasn't aware of that. I'll speak to my husband immediately." Blake's third call was to his lawyer, instructing him to file restraining orders against Emma Kellerman and her husband, citing harassment of a minor and coordination of a bullying campaign. By noon, Blake had constructed a protective web around Tyler that would make any further attacks both difficult and legally dangerous for the Kellermans. But protection was only the first phase. The second phase began when Blake accessed the private investigator's computer systems, a skill he'd maintained from his intelligence days. What he found was a goldmine of illegal activity. Jim Castellanos hadn't just been hired by the Kellermans. He'd been conducting similar harassment campaigns for other wealthy families, targeting ex-spouses, business rivals, and whistleblowers. Blake packaged this information and delivered it to 3 different law enforcement agencies, the state licensing board, and 2 investigative journalists. By evening, Jim Castellanos was in federal custody, and the families who'd hired him were facing their own investigations. Emma Kellerman called Blake that night, her voice shaking with rage. "You son of a bitch. Jim's been arrested, and now the FBI is asking us questions about Tyler. What did you tell them?" "The truth. That your family hired someone to stalk and photograph my 8-year-old son. We were gathering evidence. You were committing felonies." Blake's voice was arctic. "Emma, I gave your family every opportunity to walk away with dignity. Raymond brought this on himself with his criminal financial activities. Nicole brought it on herself with her affair and theft plans. And now you've brought it on yourself by targeting Tyler. This isn't over, Blake. We have lawyers, connections. Your lawyers can't help you now. Your connections are too busy dealing with their own FBI investigations. And Emma? The next time someone lays a hand on Tyler, the next time someone makes him cry because of your family's vendetta, I will demonstrate why people in my former profession are trained to disappear problems permanently. Blake ended the call and checked on Tyler, who was sleeping peacefully with a book about sharks still open on his chest. The boy's black eye was healing, but the incident had marked a line in Blake's mind, a line the Kellermans had crossed at their own peril. The war was escalating, but Blake had always excelled at escalation. The Kellermans were about to discover that some enemies were better left unmade. Chapter 9. The Final Checkmate. 6 months after the warehouse confrontation, Blake stood in the courthouse, watching Raymond Kellerman shuffle past in an orange jumpsuit, his wrists shackled. The once proud patriarch looked broken, aged decades by his fall from grace. Their eyes met briefly, and Blake saw recognition there. The understanding that this was Blake's design, his revenge, perfectly executed over time. Raymond had been sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for tax evasion, money laundering, and racketeering. The FBI investigation had uncovered a network of illegal gambling operations, corrupt political donations, and shell companies stretching back 20 years. The evidence had been meticulously compiled and anonymously delivered to law enforcement, piece by piece, ensuring Raymond couldn't escape through legal technicalities. Emma and her husband had fled to Canada after their own indictments came down, leaving Marcus with his grandmother. Nicole's mother, Patricia, had moved to a nursing home, her remaining assets seized to pay restitution for Raymond's crimes. As for Nicole herself, Blake had kept tabs on her from a distance. She'd finished her community college program and was working as a bookkeeper for a small nonprofit. She'd never attempted to contact Tyler, honoring their agreement. Blake respected that choice, even if he could never forgive her betrayal. Tyler, now 9, thrived in their new life together. The black eye was long healed, and the boy rarely asked about his former family anymore. He'd made new friends, excelled in school, and developed a passion for chess that reminded Blake of his own strategic mind. "Dad," Tyler said as they walked from the courthouse. "Was that really Grandpa Raymond?" "Yes." He looked sad. Blake stopped and knelt to Tyler's level. "Sometimes people make choices that lead to sad endings, buddy. But that's not our concern anymore. Our concern is building a good life together. Are we safe now?" Blake smiled, ruffling Tyler's hair. "We're safe. More than safe, we're free." That evening, Blake received an unexpected visitor. Nicole stood on his doorstep, looking nothing like the woman who'd once lived in his house. She was thinner, dressed simply, her hair shorter and darker. But there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Honesty, maybe, or the weight of genuine remorse. "I heard about the sentencing," she said. "I wanted to thank you. Thank me for not destroying me the way you destroyed everyone else. For giving me a chance to rebuild." Blake studied her face, looking for deception out of habit. He found none. "You honored our agreement. That mattered. How is Tyler?" "Happy. Healthy. Better off without the toxic influences in his life." Nicole nodded, tears starting to form. Could you tell him that I think about him? That I hope he's doing well?" "No," Blake said simply. "He's moved on, Nicole. You need to do the same." She wiped her eyes and nodded again. "I know. I wanted you to know that leaving him was the hardest thing I've ever done. I know I don't have the right to feel that way after what I did, but it's true. Perhaps that means you're becoming a better person. I'm trying to be. The woman she was selfish and weak and cruel. I don't want to be her anymore." Blake watched Nicole walk away, disappearing into the night like a ghost of his former life. He felt no satisfaction in her pain, no triumph in her isolation. She'd made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences, just as Raymond rotted in prison and Emma lived as a fugitive. Inside the house, Tyler was at the kitchen table, working on a chess problem Blake had given him. "Dad, I think I figured it out. If white moves the knight here, then black has to sacrifice the queen to avoid checkmate." Blake examined the board. Tyler's solution was elegant, ruthless, and completely correct. "Excellent work. You're thinking like a true strategist." You taught me that sometimes you have to sacrifice pieces to protect what's really important. Blake sat down across from his son, marveling at the boy's natural intelligence and moral clarity. Tyler would never suffer the betrayals Blake had endured, because Blake would ensure his son learned early how to recognize predators and respond to threats. What's really important, Tyler? Family. Real family. People who love you and protect you and never give up on you. That's right. Morrison men stick